Hello everyone. I hope you hear us now well. If anyone doesn't hear, okay, good. So let me say hello to everyone one more time. We are really happy to have this conference, to have our spotlights, and to have you as participants here. I am greeting you in the name of DigiFriend project and in the name of Croatian team who is organizing the conference together with the Institute of Ethnology and Folklore Research and University of Zadar, Department of Ethnology and Anthropology as organizers. I hope you will have a good time together with us here, that it will be inspiring and interesting conference for you. For all comments you have, just write in your comment cloud, and we will get the comments from the technician. And now I'm giving the word to Senka, who will tell you a little bit about the idea of conference, and then we continue with the program. So enjoy.
Thank you, Simon. Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know, my name is Senka Božić. I'm from the Department of Ethnology and Anthropology at the University of Zadar. And I had the pleasure of being in touch with many of you over the last few weeks during the preparation of the program for this conference. Today, I'm excited, really excited to finally welcome you all. So our topic for this conference comes from the fact that over the last 20 or 30 years, we often hear that we live in extremely fragile times. So we hear about fragile environments, fragile states, fragile economies, fragile democracies, fragile relationships, fragile borders, fragile communities, fragile bodies, fragile feelings, fragile hopes, digital fragility, fragile peace, and so on. So it seems the perfect time to rethink fragility. Our questions are, what does it mean to talk about fragility today? What does fragility do and could do? Which kinds of infrastructure are built by fragility? What imaginaries are emerging from these infrastructures? So today our discussion will move around these questions in many different ways. With a total of 8 panels and 31 presentations, I'm sure that we are going to have a productive time. I know online conferences can be a bit limited when it comes to interacting, but I'm hopeful we will figure out ways to work around that. So please make yourself comfortable wherever you are and try to stay connected as much as you can, regardless of the different time zones. Before we start with our first panel, I want to express my gratitude to all of you, but especially to our spotlight speakers. Fernando Rubio, who is with us here in Zagreb, and who will start in his presentation shortly, he is here, and followed by Jutila Sala, Mark Andrejević, Massimo Canavacci, Nan Kim, and Marie Party. So let's get started and keep our fingers crossed for a smooth technical experience today. Marie, I'm here. Could you please take over and introduce our first spotlight speaker? Marie Party is the moderator for our first panel.
Thank you, Senka, and thank you, Senka, for all your work. Can you hear me? Are you hearing me? I'm speaking. Can you hear me? No. Can you hear me now? You can hear me?
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay. Thank you, Senka. Thank you for all your work at organizing this conference. And I'm really delighted to be welcoming our first 2 speakers, particularly delighted to be...
Good, we can hear you.
We can hear you now.
Oh, you can. Okay. Did you miss all the first bit? I'm just going to keep going now, okay? So very delighted to be here, particularly to introduce our first two speakers. Particularly excited to introduce Fernando Dominguez Rubio, who I am also meeting for the first time outside of email. So Fernando is an associate professor in the Department of Communication at the University of California, San Diego. He's a sociologist, and his research is situated across a lot of fields. He's a polymath, I think: sociology, science and technology studies, anthropology, art design, and architecture. And I think just to say that we came across a paper that he'd written on fragility, which really was very suggestive and exciting to us to read. And so I feel very pleased that he's come and to speak to us today, and also looking forward to his new collaborative work entitled Fragilities, Essays on the Politics, Ethics and Aesthetics of Maintenance and Repair, which is forthcoming. So as well as looking forward to you speaking today, Fernando, we look forward to your book as well. So just to tell people that Fernando will speak for 25 minutes, there'll be 10 minutes of questions and comments, and then we'll move on to Sala, who'll be speaking after him. So welcome, Fernando, and I'll hand it over to you now.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes, can you? Yes, perfect. Okay, well, thank you, Marie, for the introduction, and thank you, Sanja and Senka and everybody for making this possible and for having me here. So I'm gonna share a screen. So let's see if this works as it should for the presentation. Okay. Okay. Let me just. Okay. So yes, so that should work. Okay, so the talk is the title of the talk is Avowing Fragility, and let me just as Marie was saying, this is part of a bigger project that is a book that is coming out next year. It's an edited volume that we are I'm publishing with a couple of friends, Jérôme Denis and David Pontil, and it is a collection of essays around the notion of fragility. It will be published in spring, and it will be open access, so free to download for everyone. Okay, so having said that, let me just get straight to it. Okay, so it is hard to believe it now, but there was a time, not that long ago, when the world was still a foregone conclusion, at least for some. This was the time when philosophers could still dwell on the certainty that, as Hassan once wrote, the world is forgiven to us as a non-tick certainty. The world was so unmistakably there, so evidently present, that it did not compel much thought. So much so that Wittgenstein pondered why it was perfectly normal for his contemporaries to ask how long a house has been in its place, but the same question was rarely ever asked about a mountain, because mountains, like the world itself, seem to belong to that realm of certainties that are evident to the point of invisibility. Such was the invisibility of the world that, for the most part, it only existed in the form of an absence. It is precisely this absence that allowed a particular form of narrating and imagining the social and the cultural as two semi-autonomous fields evolving according to their own internal logics. There was a tacit belief in that hegemonic Western-centric narrative about how we, as in capital humanity we, although always clearly referring to the global north section of it, have finally left behind that old unpredictable world that had instilled a cruel sense of fragility and powerlessness in the poets and thinkers of yore. Because we were now entering a time when it finally seemed possible to disavow this fragility, not to eliminate it completely, but enough to proclaim with Bavarian confidence that the world had been finally disenchanted and no longer inspired fear or awe. Such was the confidence that sociologists like Giddens proclaimed in the 90s that the prowess of modern institutions had finally tilted the ancient balance of fate, and had conquered for the first time ever a sense of ontological security for us, or at any rate for those of us living in the affluent sectors of the global north. For decades, these hegemonic discourses were imposed all over the world, presenting the progress and growth of the economies and democracies of the global north as natural and as inevitable as gravity itself. Looking back at that time now, revisiting its conversations and its narratives, one cannot help but wonder how those certainties and hopes that seemed so evident a couple of decades ago feel so unspeakably remote and disconnected now. What exactly has happened in between? Well, the Earth has happened. The Earth has gone from being a non-event, operating as the ontological foundation upon which to reimagine ever-growing social, cultural, and economic forms, to be a relentless event, short-circuiting, destabilizing, and interrupting those forms. The result of this transformation has been a massive gestalt inversion. The once silent background has burst into the foreground, shattering the modern world along with its narratives and certainties of progress and domination. All of a sudden, the world can no longer be taken for granted. It is no longer, as has appeared, given to us as an ontic certainty. Objects that once seemed timeless certainties, like glaciers, lakes, forests, disappear before our eyes, revealing their earthly finitude. We can see how the very same social, cultural, economic orders that just a little ago were imagined as ever-elastic forms endlessly projecting themselves into the future are now seen at risk of falling apart. It should not come as a surprise then that the talk about ontological security is all but gone. There is instead a pervasive sense of ontological fragility. This, however, is a different type of fragility because, as Michel Serres presently put it, fragility has now changed sides. This is no longer a fragility belonging to an external nature in need of human protection. This is a fragility that is felt as the inescapable condition of life on this planet. As a result, those old conversations about growth and progress have given way to conversations about living in catastrophic times, as Isabel Stengers put it, in a damaged planet, as Anna Sin and her collaborators write. Now, what exactly is collapsing? What I want to argue is that it is not, as many seem to believe, the world. What is collapsing is a particular narrative about the world. The narrative of Western modernity, which as Achille Mbembe has written, has never properly thought through its own finitude, since it has always imagined and imposed itself as an unavoidable universal horizon. Now, what I want to argue is that the collapse of this modern narrative is not a tragedy, but an opportunity to reimagine life on this planet. My central claim is that any such reimagination must be rooted in a radical avowal of fragility. This avowal is a first and necessary step to bring a much-needed corrective to the modernist hubris and its arrogant refusal to think about limits and ends. By forcing us to reckon with these limits, fragility offers an opportunity to reground our political vocabularies and ethical practices in a profound acknowledgement of the cost of nurturing and maintaining life on this planet. Because if one thing has become clear is that we live in a world where fragility can no longer be disavowed, minimized, or wished away with hopeful promises of better times, with capitalist dream worlds, or with techno fixes. After modernity's Midsummer Night's Dream, we find ourselves exactly where we have always been, in a world where fragility is not a variable that can be eliminated or domesticated, but the unavoidable condition of life on this planet. A world where fragility is not a problem to be solved, but the condition that we need to face and live with. So I would like to reclaim the importance of cultivating an attention to those moments when things, bodies, and worlds begin to fall apart and reveal their fragilities, and the need to reclaim those moments as critical places to think with and from. However, at a time when it is easy to fall into defeatist melancholia, if not outright pessimism, an invitation to think with and from fragility may not seem particularly uplifting or hopeful. My argument, however, is that this avowal of fragility needs not be pessimistic or defeatist. Rather than using fragility to pile on collapsist narratives, nostalgic lamentations about some lost modern Eden, or to further dramatize catastrophic events, I want to mobilize fragility as a problematic but generative space from which to assert the possibility to think, live, and build otherwise. More specifically, I want to argue that a radical avowal of fragility offers an opportunity for a different kind of world making, one that forces us to reckon with the precariousness and contingency of life, and that uses this reckoning as a starting point to build, nurture, maintain life-affirming politics and ethics. Because to think from fragility is not just to think about what is lost when something breaks, but it's also an opportunity to think about what can we build with that which remains after breakage. But how do we think from and with fragility? What does fragility help us see? What kind of question does it allow us to pose? And perhaps more importantly, what exactly do we mean by fragility? Now, traditionally, fragility is defined as the quality of being breakable. Crucially, not everything that breaks is necessarily fragile. The Oxford English Dictionary adds an important qualification when it defines fragility as the quality of being easily broken. It is the ease of breaking that identifies the fragile. Now, this concept of fragility, this traditional concept, has been typically used in three different but complementary ways: material, figurative, and moral. In its material sense, fragility has been employed to describe a physical property of things and bodies. It is often understood as what philosophers call primary properties, which are those properties that are inherent to something, like weight or molecular composition, which are not dependent on any external observer, like color or smell. Now, according to this definition, whether something is fragile depends on its internal composition. Fragility, thus defined, is something that belongs to ontology, to the very being of things. And as such, it is something fixed and given in advance in their nature, and consequently, something cannot be helped. The second use of fragility has been figurative. When employed in this way, fragility is used to evoke a tragic sense of powerlessness in the face of fate. One of the oldest and most pervasive figurative tropes has been that of the fragility of life. As it happens with its physical use, these figurative uses defines fragility as an ontological condition, that is, as a shared and universal quality inscribed deep in the grammar of our bodies. Hence, for example, the Buddhist notion of the body as a fragile clay pot, or the Shakespearean notion of the body as nature's fragile vessel. Now, in the moral sense, fragility has been typically deployed to denote a flaw, a weakness, an affliction. This is, for example, how the writers in the Christian tradition have explained our allegedly congenial moral weakness, stemming from our inherently imperfect human soul, which renders us forever fragile and corruptible. As in the previous cases, fragility is also understood here as a condition given in the nature of things, or in this case, our souls. Now, this brief overview of some of the typical uses reveals two tendencies about how fragility has been solidified in the Western common sense. The first is the tendency to see fragility as an ontological property, that is, as something that is given in the nature of things, bodies, and souls. Understood in this way, fragility emerges as fate, as destiny. It is just the way some things are. The second is the tendency to see this ontological property as a negative and undesirable trait. Fragility is almost invariably presented in this narrative as a lack, an absence, or an insufficiency. It is something that subtracts, that diminishes, that weakens. The fragile is that which is not solid enough, not strong enough, not durable enough, not autonomous enough. No wonder then why fragility typically emerges in these narratives as something that needs to be fixed, overcome. However, this ontological understanding of fragility misses something. What this understanding of fragility misses is that sometimes the sturdiest of rocks can crack like the softest of bubbles. In other words, what this definition misses is that fragility is not something inscribed in the nature of things, but it is a condition that is rendered. And that consequently, when we talk about fragility, we're never talking about an ontological property. We are talking about an ecological form. Now, to illustrate what I mean by this, let's take the example of a humble piece of paper. Now, if you take one of these pieces of paper and you place them outside and leave them on their own, it will take just a few days until they will crumble and fade away. So you would probably be tempted to characterize them as fragile. However, this very same piece of paper, stored in a controlled environment at 35 degrees Celsius and 80% relative humidity, can last for about 3 years. If you were to place at 20 degrees Celsius and 50% relative humidity, the same piece of paper would become remarkably durable, since it can last for about a century. And if you were to place it at 10 degrees Celsius and 40% relative humidity, it can last up to 1,200 years, making our humble piece of paper as solid and reliable, if not more, than iron or stone. So this change between fragility and solidity cannot be explained by simply looking at the piece of paper. Nothing has changed in it. It has not undergone any kind of alchemic transformation that has made it acquire new properties. The only thing that has changed are the environmental conditions in and through which our piece of paper exists. This example of the humble piece of paper reveals a simple fact. Nothing is fragile by itself, because nothing is by itself. Everything is rendered fragile by something else. Now, this idea has 4 important consequences. The first is that fragility is an empty concept. Much like the concept of near or tall, fragility only acquires meaning through the relationships through which something exists. This is precisely what our piece of paper shows. Paper is neither fragile nor solid. It can become one thing or the other, depending on the relationships in which it is inserted or the purposes for which it is used. Fragility, it follows, is relational. The very same thing can be fragile under some conditions or for a specific purpose, but exceedingly solid for others. A spider web may seem fragile to us, but is perfectly solid for the fly. The second consequence, which follows directly from the first, is that fragility is not a property given in advance, but is a condition that is rendered by different configurations. This is easily verifiable with a simple look at the appliances and technologies that organize our daily life. What makes them fragile is not simply the natural propensity of things to break. It is due to the fact that we live immersed in a capitalist system whose solidity depends on the systematic production of fragility to perpetuate the cycle of consumption. The third consequence is that fragility is not a quality attached to a particular group of things. Everything from a soap bubble to the biggest star can be rendered fragile depending on the configurations in which it is inserted. Thus, when we describe something as fragile, we are not describing a property inherent to something, we're describing a position that it occupies in a certain correlation of forces at a given moment. The fourth is that consequence is that describing something as fragile is never an innocent operation. Just like we cannot describe something as far without assuming a particular point of reference, we cannot describe something as fragile without simultaneously inscribing it and ourselves within a particular framework of relationships. If we follow this ecological definition of fragility, we find ourselves in a very different world. A world where fragility is not a natural and fixed property, but a relational and contingent position. A world where things are not fragile, but where things are rendered fragile. A world where fragility is no longer part of the explanans, but part of the explanandum. In other words, where fragility is not what does the explaining, but what needs to be explained. A world, in short, where the question of fragility is always a question about another. Fragile compared to what? Fragile for what? Fragile for whom? What or who renders this fragile, and how and why it is kept that way? These questions put before us a very different task. Understanding fragility is no longer a matter of identifying what properties makes such thing or body fragile, but rather it is about exploring the ethical and political frameworks that makes it possible for some things and not others to become or be described as fragile. Ecologizing fragility reminds us that the order we inhabit are never given in advance, but have to be constantly produced, sustained day by day. And this is why, like Sisyphus, we are condemned to be incessantly engaged in the work of maintaining and repairing, constantly negotiating boundary between continuity and change. A work that is by definition always unfinished, because no matter how much work we invest in sustaining the orders, bodies, objects, and relationships that organize our lives, they will never stop being fragile. This, however, does not mean that they are less solid. What it means is that fragility and solidity are not mutually exclusive states. They are two sides of the same coin, which is to say that everything is always simultaneously fragile and solid. This constant work of maintenance and repair confronts us with a series of ethical and political dilemmas. Because while it may be true that, as Paul Ricoeur once wrote, fragility calls for responsibility, this doesn't mean that every call needs to be attended. Not everything that is fragile deserves to be cared, repaired, or maintained. Whether this is the case depends on the ethical and political frameworks we use to define different regimes of worth. But even if we try to respond to all of these calls of fragility, we would soon realize that our capacity to answer them is helplessly finite. We simply cannot afford to attend every fragility, because attending one fragility always requires neglecting another. This is the situation that the Capitolocene confronts us with by revealing a field of diverging and often opposing human, animal, and material fragilities. Each of these fragilities have different needs and temporalities, which call for different forms of attention and different forms of repair and maintenance. The question then is how to respond to the demands of these divergent and opposing fragilities. Which fragilities must be addressed and which can be ignored? What are we willing to preserve and what are we willing to discard, and at what cost? Who or what deserves to be described as fragile? These are difficult questions, questions whose answers lead into ethical binds. Each response implies giving preference to one fragility over another, resolving one fragility to create another one, or gaining something at the cost of losing something else. But it is precisely this difficulty that makes it important to insist on this question, to sit with them and to think from them, but to do it devoid of the temptation to solve them by appealing to a common good or a universal ground that will accommodate and respond to all of these fragilities. Because we do not inhabit a world of common fragilities, but one of uncommon fragilities. Confronting the uncommonality of our fragilities should not lead us into paralysis. If anything, it is a call to cultivate political and ethical vocabularies and practices that come to terms with the fact that this uncommonality is not a problem to be solved, or a problem that can be solved, but inherent and irresolvable condition of life in this planet. Confronting these uncommon fragilities requires first coming to terms with the fact that there is never a self-evident definition of fragility. There are always competing definitions about what counts as fragile. Each of these definitions is consequential since they define what kinds of political and ethical frameworks are required to address fragility. It is not just a question of coming to terms with different ways of defining fragility, but also with the built-in asymmetries in the capacity to establish those definitions, because not everybody is allowed to define what is fragile. There are always those who have the power to define what is fragile, and those for whom fragility is a condition imposed on them. It is the members of the OECD who have the capacity to define countries as fragile, while the populations of those countries suffer the consequences of being described as fragile and in need of help. Acknowledging this asymmetry is as important as it is to acknowledge that defining something as fragile does not have the same political consequences in every case. In some contexts, calling something fragile can be a critical and emancipatory project, demonstrating that what presents itself as solid and necessary and natural is in fact fragile may allow to demystify disorders and open the possibility of critique and political action. However, in other contexts, it is the refusal to describe something as fragile that can be emancipatory and critical. This is especially the case in contexts where fragility has been used to naturalize hierarchies that subtract agency from different groups, objects, and spaces by describing them as in constant need of care and assistance. So about fragility, I should make clear, is not accepting fragility. It's not about accepting fragility. It's about building ways of being and doing that have the courage to confront and reclaim fragility, not as a way of solving anything, but as a way of forcing us to come to terms with the scars and losses, to confront them and to give an account of them. However, this avowal of fragility should not be seen purely in negative terms as a way of reckoning with limits, with the scars and losses, because limits are as much about ends as they are about beginnings. Thinking from them rather than against them is thus an opportunity to cultivate vocabularies and practices that do not relate to fragility as something to be prevented, avoided, or fixed, but as an opportunity to develop forms of attention for and responsibility towards what remains after breakdown, that reclaims those fragments that remain as starting point from where to build other ways of thinking, living, doing, and relating. When seen in this way, thinking from and with fragility is not just an opportunity to move away from the Promethean modern politics and their necropolitical promises of control and domination, but it's also an opportunity to embrace a more modest form of fragile politics that confronts us with the discomfort of living in a world that is always falling apart, that needs to be continually repaired and maintained, but which for that very reason is always being reinvented, reconfigured, and reassembled. A world where the irresolvable uncommonality of our fragilities is always both tragedy and possibility. And that's all that I wanted to say. So that's it. I stop sharing, right?
Thank you, Fernando. Timing was so perfect. I can't believe that. But and your
Well,
slides
I practice. It's not by chance.
And your slides were beautiful too. So could I just open it up for questions? Could you either put your question in the chat or raise? Okay, so Larry, you have oh no, you were clapping. Does anyone want to raise their hand? So I can see if there's a comment or a question.
She can see you.
No, there is one here.
Okay.
There's one there. Go. Senka, you can moderate over there.
Yeah, Mario has a question.
Okay, thank you for great introduction to fragility, and I hope that you are aware that you are playing in ontological atomic bombs and all these uncertainties, ontological uncertainties are you're coming actually to the sphere of office. My question is, I'm going to ask a question that I'll just a little bit elaborate the context of this question. The question is speaking from fragility, which is basically the end of your wonderfully structured essay's introduction about fragility. Your main point is it about possibility, or how can we speak from fragility? And let me just a little bit say about the context, because quite accidentally, perhaps I finished my book, which is called What Comes After Dystopia, which is basically an English title of essay was The Future of Dystopia. Even though I didn't use the word fragility, there is a kind of 21st century dystopia basically based on these ontological uncertainties. And when I'm asking you a question about speaking from fragility, you'll see kind of emancipation, possibility of emancipation, and maybe a new way of living, ethics of care, and everything. But on the other hand, which I have example in my book, for example, that fragility in this context is so-called ironically wonderful opportunity for absolute totalitarian, super fascist organization and absolute destruction of the planet in the same time. Okay, and I actually, as an example, I actually analyzed Donna Haraway, Lulu Chetan, and her basically ideas explaining that we need the ethics of care. We need to train multi-species and all of this stuff. But then she actually said, I'll just paraphrase, I will not quote, that if we think like Eichmann, that we will destroy our planet. She was basically citing Hannah Arendt and her basically opinion that Eichmann was not thinking, that it's not unfold. I was analyzing this and basically very, without any intellectual effort, come to a conclusion that we are all Eichmann's grandsons, daughters, and all of this, because we all think in a way through the numbers, algorithms, very Eichmann sort of kind of bureaucratic way of thinking. Okay, now I'm coming again. My question is about fragility, speaking from fragility, these dangers and this possibility of emancipation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't know. So the fundamental so I wanted to do two things with fragility. One is to undo certain connotations that it always comes with, which is that fragility is something that has to be avoided, has to be amended. So the first thing that I want to say is that fragility is something that can be fixed or can be overcome, because it is what life is. But then what I wanted to do was to capture the fundamental ambivalence of fragility, something that is neither good nor bad, but can be both good and bad. So you can either, so I don't think, is it me?
Somebody turn.
Oh, yes, yeah, is this one, yeah, I see it. Yeah. So what I wanted to, I'm actually not very hopeful in vocabularies of care as an emancipatory, I mean, using fragility as an emancipatory tool for a new pluriverse of interspecies collaboration. I actually don't align with that very much. So what I want to capture for me is fragility as an important analytic in the contemporary moment to ask difficult questions, not, as I said, not as a way of solving them, but as a way of raising them and forcing us to confront them. So, for example, that would be one of the questions. I mean, is this leading to an emancipatory project? Or is it actually leading to a dystopian project? But I think that fragility is a way where you can, one of the places in which that question needs to be posed today. Again, not as a way of solving it, but as a way of framing it. Did I answer?
Absolutely.
Okay. So for me, what I want to capture is fragility in that powerful, polemical ambivalence, profound ambivalence that cannot be solved, but that forces us to reckon with the question and forces us to position ourselves in relationship to it.
Okay, Marie, I have one question here. It comes
Yes,
from Mahitosh. I believe that he is in India somewhere. How would you define the terminological difference between fragility and vulnerability?
Oh, that's
the question.
That's the one that I avoided purposely in the
Yeah.
talk because it would have taken me 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So in the paper that is published, I go a little bit into that, and then in the book we go a little bit more into that. For me, they are not opposites or difference. They're not opposites. They're simply two different points that allow different questions. So, for example, all this feminist work on vulnerability, I think that is absolutely great, and it opens up certain ethical and political questions. My point is that fragility opens slightly different but equally important questions. For example, so for me, as I define vulnerability is being liable to harm. So to be vulnerable is just to be open to the possibility of harm. But you can be harmed and not be broken. You're wounded, but you still exist. Fragility for me puts us in a different side of the spectrum, is the final point of the spectrum in which that harm breaks you down. So it is the point at which you cease to exist. It's the difference between being and not being. So that question, I mean, that point of the spectrum raises different questions, because it's not about, in the case of vulnerability, for example, it opens up questions about sustainability. It opens about flexibility, about adaptation, which, for example, in ecological discourses are very prominent. But in the case of fragility, it's not about how to be wounded and keep on living. You have to face the question about how something ceases to exist, and then what? So that's, for example, the kind of questions that fragility opens. It's not about how to prevent something from breaking down. Is that something has broken down already, or has the possibility of breaking down? What do you do after? What do you do with the fragments that remain? They're no longer what it was. It's something else. So that is the difference between vulnerability and fragility. I think they are complementary, but I think that they open up different political and ethical questions, and they open up different vocabularies.
Thank you, Fernando. I think we might have to leave it there unless someone's got a very quick question that could take 30 seconds.
Or less.
We'll get 1 minute to answer it, Fernando. Is there anybody with a pressing question? Okay, let's let's move. Thank you very much, Fernando. That was a fantastic presentation, and the discussion following has been also great, and it would be great if we were all in Zagreb, that we could continue on for the rest of the day with this discussion in person with you, but thank you for that now. And let's move on to Sala. Sala, are you here? Yes. Aha. Welcome.
Yes,
So Sala, I'll just introduce you quickly. Sala Yulita is a tourism researcher and speaking about becoming fragile. And her work actually is involved in understanding locality and local rights in tourism. She's a PhD candidate, but she's also teaching, and she's a member of the Intra-Living in the Anthropocene research group, which as I understand, your co-authors are also part of that group, and that you're looking very much at the moment at your role as tourism researchers in the Arctic amidst ecological crisis. And so you'll talk to us about this whole process of becoming fragile. Are some of your co-authors here, or are you here on you're representing them? I was just going to welcome.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm here alone.
Okay, I was going to welcome them if they were here, but we're very pleased to have you here on your own. So I will just hand over to you for your presentation for 25 minutes. And again, we'll have questions, comments for 10 minutes afterwards. So welcome, Stella. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation, Marie. And I'm very honored to get this invitation to this very interesting conference. And as I already said, unfortunately, my co-authors could not attend. It is a public holiday today in Finland. So, and for family reasons, I also cannot attend the rest of the afternoon. So greetings from Finland and Lapland, and from Utsjoki. I'm at the moment in the most northern part of Finland, and I really hope the connection will work okay, because we are here in the middle of nowhere, basically. And yeah, in previous presentation, we heard outstanding definition and reflection about the concept of fragility. And in my presentation, I will go more, I have a perspective of researcher. What is fragility? What does it mean in researchers' work? And I will share my screen. I hope it will be seen okay. And I have to say that I hope my timing will be okay. I didn't practice it, so that I'm not sure that it will be exactly 25 minutes, but I hope you will remind me if I will speak too long. And if I won't be 25 minutes, then we have more time for discussion and questions. This research that I'm going to present to you today is becoming fragile. And here you can see my colleagues, Emily Höckert and Outi Rantala, and here they are even with pictures. So we all are from University of Lapland, and we all represent tourism research. We have tourism as a major at the University of Lapland. It is part of Faculty of Social Sciences. So our approach to tourism is social scientist and like quite critical approach to tourism. And so we all are members of this Intra-Living in the Anthropocene research group. Emily and Outi, they actually were founding this together with other colleagues, and then this is an international group. We have a lot of colleagues also outside from Finland. And I have to say that I'm very excited about this conference and who you are in this conference, and I hope this will open some cooperation, because it seems that we are we are working with very well, we have this tourism approach to in our research, but it seems that there's a lot of similarities, and I'm very happy that we have the chance to join this conference. So this Becoming Fragile, it's a sub research in my PhD research, and Emily and Outi are actually my PhD supervisors as well, even though we are also very close colleagues and do a lot of research together. And they sent their greetings, but they are now having they are not they are on holiday, so they cannot attend the conference today, unfortunately. So as Marie said, this Becoming Fragile is a book chapter, and it is part of this book, Researching with Proximity. This book is open access, so it can be found openly from internet. And this book was edited by Emily and Outi, and also our colleague Veera. And our research is one book chapter in this book. And the whole book, it presents a series of speculative experimental modes of inquiry in the context of the Anthropocene. And it provides a methodological experiment with proximity. And it offers nuanced ways of engaging with environmentally vulnerable Arctic. So this is a methodological book, relational methodologies for the Anthropocene. And each chapter, at the beginning of each chapter of this book, there's this kind of short overview. And this is the overview about our research, Becoming Fragile. So in our research, we are aiming to stay proximate with the idea of experimenting with personal memory work to create a joint yet fragmented story. In the previous presentation, we already heard wonderful reflection about the concept of fragility. And here, well, I think you all are very familiar with the concept of fragility already. And this was actually the first research for us where we got a little bit more deeper insight to the concept of fragility. And here I open a bit how we approach fragility in our research. So, well, on the background, there is this ever-growing feelings of fragility about our common future in the world, and also security. And also we are feeling fragile about our roles as tourism researchers and social scientists in the Arctic, in the midst of ecological crises and heated societal discussions. And even though there is this, we have written this research in the context of Arctic, but of course these ideas are not relevant only in the Arctic and the reflections that we are having here. And well, ecological crisis, it of course concerns every one of us, and it makes also researchers to feel fragile. And we were writing this, when we were writing this chapter, it was the time when Russia had quite recently attacked to Ukraine. So there were also this security questions around, and also this conflict, and of course all the other horrible conflicts that there were at that time, and there are even new ones after that. So they also make us feeling fragile. And yeah, well, I forgot to say at the beginning that the book was published last autumn, so it became out in autumn 2023. And So how we see this ecological crisis, and we share the idea with other researchers that instead of sustaining and managing environment, we should question our privileged position as humans and as humans as mastering the world and the environment. So we see also humanity, a fragile idea as such. And we see this research as an opportunity for us to become and stay proximate with the idea of fragility as a collective, strengthening and innovative space. And some little bit reflecting about the fact of being tourism researcher. Tourism is a very contradictional phenomenon and also versatile phenomenon, having several negative effects on ecological environment and contributing to ecological crisis, but it also has potential for positive ones, having positive effects, and it also has some positive potential on creating or contributing peace in the world. But as a tourism researchers, we feel very fragile about the kind of knowledge, what kind of knowledge we are creating and where the knowledge that is created through the tourism research, where it is used and who is using it and how it is used. And that's also something that makes us, especially as tourism researchers, makes us feeling very fragile. And here I have this quotation from Natalie Blanc's manifesto from 2016. And this is how we share her idea of fragility. So she writes that fragility is the precarious aesthetics of our links and interdependencies. This aesthetic frees itself from the idea of autonomy, and our ties become being or living things. I am, and I grow in the act of transforming myself and my environment. Sensitive aesthetic decisions give meaning to my world. Therefore, on a purely aesthetic level, it is essential to link the individual and collective to construct a way of thinking in common. And sharing this idea, we decided to approach methodologically our research with this collective memory work. It is a methodology emphasizing social meanings and one's own experiences. And it also emphasizes collective construction of memories through sharing and discussion. We used memory recalling. We looked back and wrote about our experiences as tourism researchers, our experiences about the moments of being and feeling fragile as tourism researchers. So we wanted to have shared memories and having our memories as a whole instead of fragmented and individual memories. Because as a feminist, new materialist researchers, we see that the very process of telling itself, it co-constitutes the focus of the study and also the writer and the reader. We began our writing this memory work by writing our memories. Each one individually, we were writing about our memories and experiences as researchers. And then we read these memories aloud to each others and reflected them together. And after this joint reflection of our memories, we revisited our personal memories, and then we worked for them further with the shared insights, and then made some additional notes and remarks. And so we had first the individual memories, and then from them we were having like a joint but fragmented still memory of the fragility as a tourism researcher. we analyzed our memories with these questions. We are reflecting these questions. What does fragility and its acceptance have to offer to researcher? Is becoming fragile inevitable in situation of multiple crises and emergencies in an Anthropocene? What can we learn about researching with fragility? So what now follows in the following slides, it answers to these questions. So it's kind of our story or different forms of fragility in our memories. One form of the fragility that we identified in our memories that we shared was fragility of uncertainty. During the first reading round, when we were reading all the individual memories, we were looking for similarities among the three memories, and we found many. And this fragility as uncertainty was one that we all shared. And how it was present in our stories. First of all, none of us three, we didn't have originally planned to have a career in academia, none of us. Each of us ended up to university by coincidence and through different versatile paths. And this kind of lack of planning in our careers, it actually led to feelings of instability and uncertainty and also fragility. Whether we have made right choices and whether we are in the right positions at the moment. And this was like at the beginning of each career, or when we had quite recently ended up our paths to university. But we realized that regardless of the stage of our academic careers, this feeling of uncertainty and dubiety or incompleteness, it continues to be present. And here is a quotation from one of the memories. This is from Outi. Who has the right to decide what knowledge is good knowledge? What is the right way to do research? What kind of research is scientific, high quality, or critical enough? Here we can see the feelings of incompleteness and fragility, even from a very experienced academic. And we also found that the researchers' work is actually very close to the work of artists or novelists. It requires personal engagement, and it also exposes personal to public case and critique. And this, of course, makes us fragile. But we also found out that how overlooking or hiding our fragility, it might risk the loss of our common creativity and increase the feelings of stress. And another quotation from our memories is, I have gained confidence that things will work out, even though you have no idea what you are doing or where it will get you. In fact, this is a quite good start for open-minded and honest research. And of course, I think we all in the conference, we share this fragility in the damaged world. This planetary concern was another common form of fragility in our stories. As Timothy Morton has said, climate crisis is a hyper object that has entered everything and is all over the place. So that's why we all share it. And this crisis, of course, it affects our work as researchers. It forces us to think and sense, imagine, and act in a new way within our academic work and in the field of tourism also. As an academic in the tourism, but also when we are doing cooperation with the tourism industry. And that causes a lot of feelings of fragility. And this quotation describes this feeling of fragility related to damaged world. Does my research and the knowledge I'm creating through my research have any significance in solving these enormous challenges? What if I'm producing knowledge that is unethical or harmful for some viewpoint? But, however, we must continue with the act of looking out and creating connection with the unfamiliar world of crisis, despite or even more because of the fact that it can reveal our fragility. And as Heather Swanson and her colleagues, they encourage us to in common learning through multiple practices of knowing to study the conditions of habitability in the world in these dangerous times. Then togetherness in difference. Doing research together with a research community or multiple research communities, it was raised in our memories one possible answer to the concerns and anxieties in previous slides as also. Togetherness in research making and being with and researching with research communities, it both relieves our fragility, but it also requires fragility. We see that togetherness, it creates hope and strength, but it also requires openness, understanding, acceptance, and above all, appreciation of difference towards everyone. In order to recognize our ambivalences and also diversity in our stories, we didn't want to look at only for the similarities, but also we returned to our memories and continued our memory work by sensitizing ourselves also to differences. Because we realized that we feel very comfortable in our current research team, and where we respect everyone and each others, and we are not hurrying to understand, to know the other. But then we also found out that it is rather contradictory to think that we should stay in with researchers and in research communities where it is easy to be and nice to be, and with the researchers who share similar values with you. And here's a reflection on that from our memory work, our memories. Instead of raising our defenses, we could react with an urge to understand the other and oneself. All standpoints are valuable, even though we would hold different worldviews. And of course, yeah, we need to reflect on that of course, working with someone who does not share similar values with you, or even maybe not similar understanding of research making, it is not easy. It makes you fragile, and it even can cause feelings of hurt. It may be far from beautiful, and thus we cannot require fragility from everyone or anyone, but we more are asking for acceptance or an appreciation of fragility. We began to call this work that we did, this collective memory work, we began to call it collective fragility work. Because our shared understanding of fragility, it highlights recognizing the needs and emotions of the other. We need to engage with diversity and with difference. Diversity and difference with curiosity and care. And we also started to think about fragility. Could it even be seen as a strength, shared strength in our academic work? Could it be seen as a strength to feel strong empathy for both for others, both for and from others, even maybe a superpower of being deeply moved by others and recognizing the feelings that guide our work? And maybe acknowledging one's fragilities and especially recognizing that the fragilities, we share them with others. Could it be the key to approach relational becoming, being, and living in the damaged world, and engaging the research with these feelings? we think that being and becoming fragile with colleagues, with your research colleagues, it may help us researchers also become and recognize fragility in other contexts. And that's why we suggest this collective fragility work as an approach that can allow us to experience togetherness and proximate togetherness with all surrounding beings and with all different stakeholders. In the pictures that I have in this slide, there are these pictures are from exhibition called Earth Voice. Pictures are from planning process and establishing and opening of the exhibition. And this exhibition, it is now at the moment open in a national park in Lapland, national park called Pyhäluosto. And this exhibition, it combines research and photography. So there, we as researchers have contributed a text quotations to the exhibition, and then there are photographers who have been taking photos. And the meaning of the exhibition is that we want to wake up human guests in national park to think about their role in the national park, and also what kind of what do they live in the national park, and how they are together and in common with the other beings in the national park, and also what kind of role they have and what kind of skin they live there. In the process, we had a lot of different stakeholders with different values and different worldviews, but we shared something in common. We all had shared the concern of ecological crisis. And even though we didn't have a common understanding what is the most harmful thing that human guests may live in national parks, then we ended up to have this exhibition, and everyone are very satisfied on that. And also the human guests who had written some notes in the hut. This exhibition is in 3 different huts in the national park, and there are guests' books where people have written notes. They are very fascinated about the exhibition. So this is I see this is a practical example of collective fragility work based on research, and I just wanted to share this example with you. And if you have an opportunity to visit Finland and Lapland this summer, I recommend this exhibition in Pyhäluosto National Park. So thank you. Here you can see my references behind the presentation, and then I say thank you. And if you want to contact, this is my email address, but you find us also from LinkedIn, for example. Thank you.
Thank you, Sala. Thank you very much. Okay, any questions, comments? If you can, I'm not sure whether there are any people in the room. If there are, Senka, you can moderate that bit, but anyone here online, if you just use the icon with the hand up button. Do you want to take your slide down now, Sala? That will let me see more people.
Sure.
Thank you. So, comments or question? Maybe I can ask you a question. One of the things that that I appreciated about what you said was the fragility of, you talked about the fragility of your knowledge, which is, and a kind of uncertainty about the knowledge that you're producing, which is something very difficult for academics to really talk about, given that they're engaged in the sort of production of scientific knowledge. So how do you reckon that? How do you reconcile that with this idea that your knowledge is robust and sound and defensible, or defendable, which is, you know, meant to be the scientific work of the academic.
Mhm.
I mean, I
Well,
appreciate very much your discussion about that uncertainty, that fragility of that knowledge. Yeah.
And this is, I think this is quite common feeling among tourism researchers. We are a bit, I think we are a bit a special field in the academia because it is so closely connected to practical industry. And then the industry is asking for us like certain kind of knowledge and sometimes complaining that you are not producing useful knowledge. So the knowledge that they can use in a business, for example. And then this is not the purpose, of course, as an academic research, as a researcher, it's not the purpose to contribute or product knowledge that can be used for making money. But maybe this makes it more clear why this is so big question as a tourism researcher, like what kind of knowledge, and then how the knowledge is then used, and then how academia takes the knowledge. We are like between the industry and academia, even though of course we are part of academia, and then there are like different kind of pressure maybe coming. And then sometimes we have also faced the situation that we reflect also in the chapter, that as tourism researchers, we are not always taken seriously in the academia. Like sometimes we hear that what is tourism research? It's seen only as a business. So that's also like different kind of pressure or thing that makes us feel fragile, and how our knowledge is understood, the knowledge that we are creating or producing through our research. I don't know if I answered to your question, but
No, it's very good. That's very good. And I didn't really think about that. Like, I think that as the universities become more and more corporatized, then you probably become much more actually popular in your universities for providing businesses with usable knowledge, which is not what you might consider to be scientific academic knowledge. Yeah. Thank you, Sala. That's any other questions?
We have one question here.
Yes, could you moderate that, Senka? Thank you.
Yes, Sonia.
Well, I don't know still if it will be question or comment or just invitation also to Fernando to combine what you were talking now, Sala, because in his presentation he said how we have to start to think from fragility and to see it as a possibility for something new. And here we see an example how it is actually in practice. And I was thinking maybe this was actually my question to you. I was thinking to ask you before, where do we start to talk about it, to incorporate this idea of fragility and to include it in our thinking and our actions when we start to think from fragility, if you understand what I mean. Because I really like the presentation and everything, but I don't see how in practice on a global level, when we see big problems which are happening because of Earth disappearing, how we can how it can be in a practice like positively seen. Yeah, actually, yeah. It was question for Fernando, but just because I see here some connection between what you were talking about, because of course we all see that we are facing very fragile environments, for example, and we would like to start to do it different way and to somehow to preserve some things But in reality, especially when we are faced with the different politics and different, of course, interests in real life, it's not so easy. So this was actually what I wanted to see, how you manage this. I see you can't manage it, but where are, maybe Fernando has idea, where are possibilities for?
Okay, I can begin the answer, and then Sarah, probably you can build on that.
Yeah.
So for me, I mean the one way to do this is that many of the vocabularies that we have, for example, in terms of environmental problems, are still vocabularies and programs that are based on a disavowal of fragility, meaning that they still deal with fragility as if it is something that can be solved. So many of the programs that we have, reparation, sustainability, preservation, resilience, are vocabularies that still have this idea that maybe if we change our practices, or if we have a new technological development, this can be solved. And for me, that evades the question and makes the difficult question of having to face what if that is not the case. So for me, if you put fragility as something that you have to confront, and this actually goes to Mario's question, it's not something that you can solve, but it's something that you have to confront. Then these kind of vocabularies of resiliency, which for me evade the question, have to be reframed, and then you have to think about something that you preserve at the cost of having something that you lose. Many of these vocabularies are still premised on the idea that we can still have win-win scenarios in which we don't lose anything. And I think that with fragility, you have to confront the question of loss and have to accept letting go of things or making difficult moral decisions. Yeah. So that's one of the things that I would say. And then actually in terms of, for example, just one more comment, I didn't talk about this at all, but one of the things for me is very important, has to do with our own practice as researchers. When I talk about thinking with fragility, I mean, we think with fragility, and in the sense of not thinking that our knowledge is not fragile. So we have to also think that the knowledge that we produce is partial, will not have answers to everything. So there's an invitation to be modest and to face the limits that we have and that the kind of knowledge that we produce. So it's also about, that's a different kind of topic, but it's also kind of a different ethics of research as well, in which we are not this kind of all-seeing researchers that we have the answers because we see the fragility that they don't see. And actually, our own knowledge is also fragile, and we have to understand that we don't have all the solutions, and we are just partially positioned within these fields. So yeah.
Thank you, Sala. Sorry, do you have any comment?
No, I totally agree with Fernando, everything that you said. And what we in this research, with this research, we would like to, I think our kind of main message is that fragility is something, definitely something not to be overlooked or hidden, but to appreciate and then, well, first accept and then appreciate, because with fragile approach, I think they can, at least in research, you can do open and honest research when you accept your fragility and even appreciate your own fragility and the other fragilities around you as well.
So just one more comment to that. When you said that it is difficult, I think that's the point. I mean, that's precisely, for me, fragility an invitation to face those difficult questions and not to evade them, which I think that a lot of our discourses still do.
Okay, Maria, are you going to finish?
I'm muted. Yeah, no, I'm muted. I just wanted to thank Sala very much for her paper. I thought it was very thoughtful and very thought-provoking. And thank you to both Sala and Fernando for opening this conference with your great spotlight presentations and for the discussion from other participants. It's been a really wonderful session. And I'll hand over to you, Senka, to say, is there's a break of 10 minutes? Is that right?
Yeah, we will
Sala,
start.
thank you for your time.
There is a short break. We are starting 11:20 with our panel, Fragility and Digital, with Mark Andreevich and Massimo Canevacci, two professors. We are looking forward actually to hear and to continue, but now we are having a short break. Stay connected, as I said, wherever you are, you know, grab a cup of coffee or whatever and come back. Yeah. Okay, see you soon.
7 minutes, 7 minutes now.
Meetings in 7 minutes. Yeah, we start 11:20.
So-